folding laundry when she knocked. Not a hard knock. Not the kind that demands something. It was the kind of knock that apologizes for itself. 3 small taps, like she wasn't sure she had the right to be there at all. I set down the pillowcase I was folding, and I went to the door, and when I opened it, my daughter-in-law was standing on my porch in the November cold without a coat. Her name is Priya. She married my son Owen 4 years ago in a small ceremony in my backyard, under the oak tree my husband planted the year we moved in. She wore her mother's sari, and Owen wore a linen suit and cried before she even reached him. I have loved her since the afternoon she sat in my kitchen and told me she didn't know how to make pie crust and asked if I would teach her. That was 2 years before the wedding. She has always been like that. Earnest. Careful. Asking permission for things she doesn't need permission for. She was standing on my porch without a coat, and her eyes were swollen. And she was holding her own elbows like she was trying to keep herself together from the outside. I said, "Come in." I didn't ask questions. I just stepped back and let her through the door. She sat down at my kitchen table, and I put the kettle on, and I didn't say anything for a while, because sometimes the kindest thing you can do is give someone silence and let them find their own way into whatever they need to say. I got down 2 mugs. I put honey on the table. I sat across from her and I waited. She said, "I'm sorry to come here like this." I said, "Don't be." She looked at the table for a long moment. Then she said, "Your daughter called Owen last night. She said some things. And then she said something to me this morning and I didn't know where else to go." I asked her what my daughter said. She looked up at me. Her voice dropped to almost nothing. She said, "Gwen told me I was never going to be a real part of this family. That Owen married beneath himself. That I should stop pretending I belong here." I sat with that for a moment. I said, "She said that to your face." She nodded. I said, "This morning?" She said, "She came to the house. Owen had already left for work. She knocked, and I let her in because she's his sister, and I always let her in. And she sat down at our table, and she said it like she was telling me the weather." I thought about Gwen sitting down at Priya's table. Priya, who would have offered her coffee. Who would have been warm and welcoming the way she always is, the way she has been for 4 years, no matter how many times my daughter has returned that warmth with cold. I said, "Are you all right?" She said, "I'm pregnant." And then she started to cry. I got up and I went around the table and I put my arms around her and I let her cry into my shoulder, and I did not say anything because there was nothing to say yet. I just held her. She is 29 years old. She was sitting in my kitchen without a coat in November, crying into my cardigan, and I held her like I would have held Owen when he was small and something hurt him, and I couldn't fix it fast enough. After a while, she pulled back and wiped her face with the back of her hand and said, "I'm sorry." I said, "Stop apologizing." She almost smiled. I said, "Does Owen know about the baby?" She said, "We found out last week. We were going to tell everyone at Thanksgiving." I said, "Does Gwen know?" Priya shook her head, and then something crossed her face, something careful and unsure. She said, "I don't know how she would have found out. We haven't told anyone." I thought about that. I said, "When exactly did she say this to you?" She said around 9 this morning, right after Owen left. She must have been watching for his truck to pull out. I sat back down across from her. The kettle started to whistle, and I got up and poured the water and brought the mugs back to the table, and I just thought for a minute. Gwen has always had a particular feeling about Priya that I could never fully explain, and that I had for a long time tried to excuse. She was protective of Owen. She was slow to warm up to new people. She had her father's stubbornness and her own complicated grief about how our family had changed over the years. I told myself those things. I made room for them the way you make room for things you don't want to look at directly. But there is no way to excuse what Priya had just described. And the timing of it. Gwen showing up the moment Owen's truck left the driveway, sitting down at that table, saying those words to a woman who was 8 weeks pregnant and keeping a secret and had done nothing at all, except love my son. I said, "I'm glad you came here. I mean that." She wrapped both hands around her mug. She said, "I didn't want to cause trouble." I said, "You didn't cause anything. That's not what this is." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I don't want Owen to feel like he has to choose." I said, "He won't have to choose. That's not going to be the situation." I didn't tell her what I was already thinking. I didn't want to make a promise in front of her that I couldn't keep, or that would make things worse before I had time to think clearly. But I knew, sitting there in my kitchen with my hands around my own mug, that something was going to have to change. Not shift slightly, not smooth over, change. Gwen is 51 years old. She is my daughter. I have loved her for every one of those years, including the hard ones, the years after her father died, the years when she was angry at everything and I was the closest target. I have never stopped loving her. But love is not the same as permission. And I had been giving her permission, quietly, without meaning to, for a very long time. After Priya left, I called my son. Not Owen. My other son, my older one, Terrence. He lives 40 minutes away, and he has always been the person I call when I need to think something through before I act on it. He is steady in a way that I am not always steady. He does not rush. He asks good questions. I told him what Priya had told me. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "How long has this been going on?" I said, "In one form or another, since the wedding." He said, "And you're just telling me now?" I said, "I thought it would get better." He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. He said, "Mom, what do you want to do?" I said I wanted to talk to Gwen first. I wanted to hear it from her. I wanted to give her the chance to tell me it was a misunderstanding, that the words came out wrong, that she had been having a terrible morning and took it out on the wrong person. I wanted to give her that. Terrence said, "And if it's not a misunderstanding," I said, "then we're going to have a very different conversation." He said, "Do you want me there?" I said, "Not yet. Let me try alone first." I called Gwen that afternoon. She answered on the second ring, cheerful, the way she gets when she knows she's done something and is waiting to see if anyone noticed. I know my daughter's voices. I have known them for 51 years. I said, "I need you to come over." She said, "Tonight?" I said, "Yes, tonight." She came at 7. She came in through the back door, the way she always does, the way all my kids do, and she sat down at the same kitchen table where Priya had sat 6 hours earlier, and she said, "What's this about?" And she was still doing the cheerful voice. I said, "Priya came to see me today." Something shifted in her face, not much, just a small tightening around the eyes. She said, "Oh?" I said, "She told me what happened this morning. I want to hear your side of it." Gwen was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I just told her the truth." I said, "What truth?" She said, "Owen has always been too good for what he settled for. I love him. I'm trying to protect him." I said, "From what?" "From a woman who has done nothing but love him and make room for all of us, for 4 years. She said, "You've always taken her side." I said, "There are no sides. That's what you don't understand." She leaned back in her chair. She crossed her arms. She said, "She's not like us, Mom." I said, "Like us how?" She looked at me like the answer was obvious, like I was being deliberately slow. I said, "I want you to say it out loud. Whatever you mean by that, I want you to say it out loud in my kitchen so we can both hear it." She didn't say it, but she didn't take it back either. I said, "Gwen, she is pregnant." She went still. I said, "She and Owen are expecting a child. They were going to tell everyone at Thanksgiving, And you went to her house this morning and you sat down at her table and you told her she didn't belong in this family while she was keeping that secret alone. The color drained out of her face. I said, I don't know what you were trying to protect, but you walked into that house and you took something from her. Whatever dignity she had left after years of your cold shoulders and your pointed comments and your very deliberate exclusion, you walked in there and you took it. She said, I didn't know about the baby. I said, that doesn't make it better. She said, I just thought. I said, I know what you thought. You've been thinking it for 4 years. And I have been patient with it because I told myself it would pass, and because I didn't want to make things harder for Owen, and because you are my daughter and I love you, and I have made excuses for you that I should not have made. She looked up at me. I said, that's done now. She said, what does that mean? I said, it means that I am not going to watch you make that girl feel like a stranger in this family for one more day. It means that if you cannot find a way to treat Owen's wife with basic human dignity, you will not be welcome at my table. Not at Thanksgiving, not at Christmas, not any Sunday dinner, not any birthday, not any occasion that I have anything to do with. She stared at me. I said, I'm not choosing her over you. I want you to understand that. I am choosing what kind of family we are going to be, and I'm telling you that you have a choice to make too. She said, you can't be serious. I said, I am entirely serious. She stood up. She said, I can't believe this. You're taking the side of someone you've known for 4 years over your own daughter. I said, I'm not taking sides. I'm telling you what I will and will not accept. Those are different things. She picked up her purse. She said, fine, fine. She left through the back door, and I heard her car pull out of the driveway, and I stood in my kitchen alone, and I thought about what I had just said, and I decided I was right. That was a Thursday. On Friday morning, I called Owen. I had thought about this a lot on Thursday night. I did not sleep well. I lay in my bed and I thought about Owen and about Priya and about the baby I hadn't known about yesterday morning and now couldn't stop thinking about. I thought about what it would feel like to be Priya, 29 years old and pregnant, and in a family where your sister-in-law had made a project of your exclusion for 4 years. I thought about whether Owen knew how bad it had gotten, whether he had been protecting Priya from him knowing or protecting himself from having to act on it. When he answered, I said, are you alone? He said, Priya's in the other room. What's wrong? I said, nothing is wrong. I want to talk to you about something, and I don't want to upset her more than she already is. He said, she told you. I said, yes. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Mom, I'm sorry. I should have said something to Gwen a long time ago. I said, you should have, but you didn't. And that's between you and your wife, and I'll let you handle that part. What I want you to know is what I said to Gwen last night. I told him everything. He was quiet through most of it. When I finished, he said, you told her she wouldn't be welcome at Thanksgiving. I said, if she can't treat Priya with respect, yes. He said, Gwen is going to lose her mind. I said, Gwen has some choices to make. He said, Mom. I said, Owen, that baby, your baby, is going to grow up in this family, and the way we handle the next few months is going to say everything about what kind of family that child grows up in. I am not going to let your sister make Priya feel like an outsider in the family that child is born into. I'm not going to do it. He was very quiet for a long time. Then he said, thank you. He said it like it cost him something, like he had been carrying something for a long time and had just been allowed to set it down. I said, just take care of her and let me handle the rest. Thanksgiving came 2 weeks later. Gwen did not come. She had called me twice in those 2 weeks. The first call was angry. She said I was overreacting, that she had just spoken her mind, that people in this family had always been allowed to speak their minds, and now suddenly she was being punished for honesty. I let her talk. When she was finished, I said, "There's a difference between honesty and cruelty, and what you said to Priya was the second thing." She hung up. The second call came 3 days before Thanksgiving. She was less angry. She said she didn't want to miss dinner. I said I didn't want her to miss it either. I said she was welcome if she could look Priya in the eye and apologize, a real apology, not the kind that is really just an explanation for why you weren't wrong. She said she would think about it. She didn't call back. So it was Terrence and his wife and their 3 kids and Owen and Priya and me. We told the family about the baby over cornbread and collard greens, and everyone cried a little. Priya sat at my kitchen table, the same table where she had sat 6 weeks earlier without a coat, and she laughed at something Terrence's youngest said, and the light was coming in through the window behind her. And she looked exactly like what she is, which is part of this family. Gwen called me on Friday afternoon. She said, "How was it?" I said it was good. "We missed you." She said, "Was Priya there?" I said, "Of course she was." She said, "And everyone made a big deal of her." I said, "Gwen, she's expecting a baby. She's our family." "Yes, everyone made a big deal of her." Silence. I said, "The door is still open. It will stay open, but you have to decide what you want to walk through it toward." She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "I don't know how to do this." And that was the first honest thing she had said to me in months. That was the first thing that didn't have armor on it. I said, "I know. You've been afraid of losing Owen for a long time, since your father died. And instead of telling him that, you turned it into something else. You turned it on her." She was quiet. I said, "She didn't take him from you. She's not trying to. Owen has enough room in him for all of us, but you have to let there be room." She said, "What if I don't know how?" I said, "Then we figure it out. That's what families do when they're willing to try." Christmas was small that year. Gwen came. She came early, which she never does, and she sat in my living room while I finished in the kitchen, and she was quiet for a while. When Priya and Owen arrived, Gwen stood up and she said, "Priya, I owe you an apology. It's overdue. What I said to you was cruel, and it wasn't true, and I am sorry." Priya looked at her for a moment. Then she said, "Thank you. I appreciate that." They did not fall into each other's arms. They did not become instantly close. That is not how it works, and I was not expecting it to be. But they sat at the same table, and they ate the same food, and Gwen asked about the nursery, and Priya showed her pictures on her phone. And that was something. That was enough for that day. There are things I have learned in 64 years. Some of them I learned quickly, and some of them took most of my life. I have learned that love without limits is not actually love. It is permission. And permission for cruelty, even when the person giving it does not mean it that way, is still permission for cruelty. I loved my daughter and I kept quiet, and my silence became a kind of consent for the years of pointed words and cold shoulders and deliberate exclusions that Priya endured with so much patience and so much grace. I will not be quiet about that again. I have also learned that people are more capable of change than we give them credit for when we stop protecting them from consequences. Gwen needed to understand that her behavior had a cost, not because I wanted to punish her, but because she needed to feel the weight of the choice she had been making over and over, every time she chose cruelty over welcome. She is working on it. Some weeks are better than others. The baby is due in April. It is a girl. We do not have a name yet, or if they have one, they haven't told me, and I am choosing to find that delightful rather than frustrating. There will be time. Last Sunday, they both came for dinner, Owen and Priya, and I made the pot roast that Owen has asked for since he was 11 years old, and we sat around the table and talked about ordinary things, nothing things, the kind of conversation that means everything precisely because it means nothing in particular. And at some point, I looked across the table at Priya, who was laughing at something Owen said. her hands wrapped around her glass, that particular glow that comes in the second trimester, and I thought about the morning she knocked on my door without a coat. She came here because she had nowhere else to go. She came here because she needed someone to be on her side. And I am glad, deeply and without reservation, that I was able to be that person. That I did not make excuses. That I did not make excuses. That I did not wait for things to smooth over on their own. When someone you love is being made small by someone else you love, the kind thing, the truly loving thing, is not to stay out of it. The kind thing is to make very clear what you will and will not allow, to draw the line in the open where everyone can see it, not with noise, but without flinching. I am 64 years old. I have buried a husband and raised 3 children and built a life that I am proud of. I have made mistakes that cost people I love. I have made mistakes that cost people I love. I have also done some things right. I am still learning which is which. But I know this. The day Priya knocked on my door in November, I did the right thing. I stepped back. I let her in. I put the kettle on. And then I did what needed doing. That is enough. That has always been enough. I think about Priya standing on my porch without a coat a lot, not in a heavy way. In the way you think about a moment that turned out to matter more than you knew it would while it was happening. 3 small knocks. An apology in her posture before she said a single word. And I just stepped back and let her in. That is not a heroic thing. That is the minimum. But I had not always done even that, and I think it is worth being honest about. For years, I told myself that staying quiet was keeping the peace, that giving Gwen room to work through her feelings was the loving thing, the patient thing. I believed that if I waited long enough, if I made enough space, she would come around on her own. What I did not understand, or did not want to understand, was that my silence was not neutral. Every time I heard a pointed comment and said nothing, every time I watched Priya absorb another small exclusion with grace, and I looked away, I was telling Gwen that it was acceptable. Not with words, with the absence of them. There is a version of kindness that is really just conflict avoidance wearing a better name. I have been practicing that version for a long time, and the cost of it was not paid by me, it was paid by Priya, quietly, for 4 years. What I had to reckon with, sitting alone in my kitchen the night Gwen left through the back door angry, was that doing the right thing is rarely comfortable. Gwen is my daughter. I love her in the specific, irreducible way you love someone you have known since before they could speak. Telling her that her behavior had consequences was one of the harder things I have done. Not because I was wrong to do it. Because love does not make hard things easy, it just makes them necessary. I also had to be honest with myself about what had gone wrong and why. Gwen's cruelty toward Priya did not come from nowhere. It came from grief she had never fully worked through, from fear she had never named out loud, from a way of thinking about family that was too small to hold the people Owen chose to bring into it. Understanding that did not excuse what she did, but it gave me something to work with. It is easier to stay angry than to ask why someone became the way they became. Asking why takes more patience, and it requires you to accept that people are more complicated than the worst things they do. What I know for certain is this: the families that hold together are not the ones where nothing hard ever happens. They are the ones where someone, when it matters, is willing to say out loud what everyone else is only thinking. To draw the line, to mean it. Priya knocked on my door because she needed someone to stand with her. Owen needed someone to tell him it was all right to stop carrying that weight alone. And Gwen, underneath all of it, needed someone to stop letting her be less than she was capable of being. I am 64 years old. I do not have everything figured out. I have made mistakes in this family that I will carry for the rest of my life. But I know that the morning I stepped back from that door and let Priya in, And the night I looked my daughter in the eye and told her the truth, I was doing the thing that needed doing. Not loudly, not with a speech, just clearly and without flinching, and with enough love for all of them to mean it. That is all I know how to offer. I have found, more often than not, that it is enough.